In the bustling cities of northern Italy during the early 14th century, civic pride wasn't just a feeling, it was a matter of life and death. Cities like Modena and Bologna were fiercely independent, each vying for influence, wealth, and honor. The Italian peninsula was fragmented, with dozens of city-states constantly jockeying for power, their allegiances shifting between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. Within this landscape of politics and power, even the smallest insult could ignite a full-scale war. And in this case, that insult came in the form of a simple wooden bucket. Modena and Bologna had long been rivals. Modena, aligned with the Ghibellines, supported the Holy Roman Emperor. Bologna, staunchly Guelph, sided with the Pope. Their rivalry spanned generations, fueled by border disputes, trade conflicts, and centuries of accumulated grudges. Trade routes between the cities were often blocked, markets raided, and ambassadors insulted. In this tense environment, every slight mattered. According to legend, in 1325, Bolognese soldiers entered Modenese territory and stole a bucket from a city well. On the surface, this might seem trivial, a small act of petty theft. But in medieval Italy, symbolism carried enormous weight. A city's honor, its reputation for strength and vigilance, was at stake. To Modena, the stolen bucket wasn't just a container for water. It represented Bologna's audacity, their challenge to Modenese pride. The Modenese did not take the insult lightly. They rallied their forces, gathering an army of infantry and cavalry. Archers, pikemen, and knights prepared for battle. The streets of Modena buzzed with anticipation as young men trained, blacksmiths sharpened weapons, and standard-bearers embroidered banners displaying the city's emblem. Every soldier knew that this war was about more than the bucket. It was about honor, civic pride, and the reputation of their city for generations to come. On the Bolognese side, the city also prepared its army. Citizens and mercenaries alike were mobilized, armed with swords, crossbows, and spears. They knew that this conflict was as much about symbolism as strategy. For Bologna, victory meant reclaiming pride, maintaining dominance in regional politics, and sending a message to every other city-state that they could not be mocked. The armies clashed near the town of Zappolino. Contemporary accounts describe a chaotic, thunderous battlefield, horses rearing, swords clanging, arrows flying. Hundreds of men fell in the fighting, and yet the central object of contention, a humble bucket, loomed large in the minds of both sides. Historians have noted that this conflict, while tragic in terms of lives lost, also demonstrates the peculiar blend of seriousness and absurdity characteristic of medieval Italian warfare. The Modenese army, disciplined and motivated by outrage, eventually triumphed. They routed the Bolognese forces, capturing prisoners and forcing the remaining soldiers to retreat. In a final act of triumph and ridicule, the Modenese retrieved the stolen bucket. They hung it from the Torre della Ghirlandina, Modena's cathedral bell tower, as a trophy and a warning. It wasn't merely a bucket. It was a symbol of Modena's dominance and Bologna's embarrassment. The bucket still hangs there today, a wooden reminder of a war fought over pride, politics, and the unlikeliest of causes. But why has this war captured the imagination of history enthusiasts? The War of the Bucket stands out not because of strategic brilliance, nor because of lasting political change, but because of its absurd premise. Entire armies mobilized, fought, and died over a single wooden container. Yet in that absurdity lies a lesson about the medieval mindset. Honor, symbolism, and reputation often mattered more than territory or resources. The cultural context of the time helps explain this. Italian city-states were fiercely competitive, and their citizens were deeply invested in their city's prestige. Wealth and trade were crucial, but so was appearance. A city mocked for weakness risked losing allies, trade agreements, and influence. In this environment, even a minor theft could be seen as a direct threat to the city's standing in the complex network of Italian politics. Moreover, the War of the Bucket highlights the way medieval warfare functioned as both spectacle and punishment. Armies were raised not just to defeat an opponent militarily, but to demonstrate power, discipline, and civic virtue. Parades, displays of banners, and the hanging of the bucket were part of a broader system of signaling, telling other cities and rivals that Modena would not tolerate insult, and that Bologna's audacity had consequences. Despite the bloodshed, the war has entered legend more for comedy than tragedy. Historians and writers often cite it as the funniest medieval conflict, illustrating both the passion and the peculiar priorities of Italian city-states. The image of entire armies clashing while the central grievance is a stolen bucket remains a vivid reminder that human pride can sometimes escalate the smallest events into epic confrontations. The aftermath of the war solidified Modena's reputation in northern Italy. Bologna, humiliated, had to rebuild not only its army but also its civic image. Trade, diplomacy, and alliances were influenced by the outcome, demonstrating how even seemingly ridiculous conflicts could have practical political consequences. The War of the Bucket also serves as a reflection on medieval society's values. Honor, loyalty, and courage were paramount. Citizens and soldiers risked life and limb to defend not just territory, but the symbolic integrity of their city. In many ways, the absurdity of the war underscores the intensity of these social and cultural expectations. Modern audiences are drawn to this story precisely because it is both human and ridiculous. It reminds us that history is not only shaped by kings, emperors, and great battles, but also by the quirks of human pride and the strange twists of fate. A wooden bucket, insignificant by today's standards, once commanded the devotion of hundreds of men and determined the course of a city's honor. Over time, the bucket became a symbol, a relic preserved through centuries, telling the story of a conflict that might otherwise have been forgotten. It hangs in Modena not just as a piece of wood, but as a monument to one of the strangest wars ever fought, a reminder of how humor, absurdity, and human ego can intertwine with history. The War of the Bucket remains a popular topic for historians, educators, and storytellers. It is cited in books, documentaries, and viral videos, demonstrating that even minor episodes in history can capture the imagination when they reveal something universal about human nature. Pride, rivalry, and the lengths we will go to defend our honor. And so, the War of the Bucket lives on. Entire armies once battled over a simple bucket, and centuries later we still laugh, marvel, and wonder at the absurdity of it all. History, it seems, is not always serious. Sometimes it's downright hilarious. In the end, the War of the Bucket teaches us that context is everything. What seems ridiculous to us today was entirely serious to those involved. Medieval Italy's city-states were complex, competitive, and fiercely proud. A stolen bucket could spark a war, and a war could be remembered for centuries, all because of the power of human pride and the desire to protect honor. This is the story of the War of the Bucket, a medieval conflict that combined strategy, courage, and a touch of absurdity. A war fought over a single wooden container that changed nothing in the world, yet changed everything in the hearts and memories of those involved. The morning of the battle at Zappolino was crisp, the mist curling over the fields as both armies prepared. Modenese soldiers, clad in chainmail and leather, polished their weapons and adjusted their banners. The banners bore the city's coat of arms, a clear signal of pride and defiance. Young men, many only teenagers, gripped swords and pikes, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear, excitement, and civic duty. Every citizen watching from the city walls knew that today was about more than the stolen bucket. It was about showing that Modena could not be mocked. Bologna's army approached from the east, their flags fluttering in the wind. They too were determined to reclaim honor, to prove that their city-state was stronger, smarter, and unyielding. Crossbows were readied, cavalry lined up in formation, and infantry checked their armor. The leaders of Bologna rallied their troops with fiery speeches, reminding them that victory or humiliation lay just beyond the hill. When the two forces finally clashed, the scene was chaotic. The clash of steel rang through the valley. Horses reared, men shouted, and arrows darkened the sky. Amidst the melee, the central symbol, the bucket, was a silent witness. Somewhere on the field, a wooden pail stolen from Modena's well sat as the spark for this enormous conflict. Soldiers on both sides fought not for land, riches, or power, but for pride and reputation, demonstrating the unique intensity of medieval city-state rivalries. Accounts from the time describe the battle as fierce. Modena's disciplined forces held the line while Bologna tried repeatedly to break through. Cavalry charged, horses crashing into infantry, while archers from both sides shot volleys into advancing ranks. Each side suffered heavy casualties, the ground soaked with blood, yet neither army could ignore the symbolic importance of victory. Every soldier knew that the outcome would define the honor of their city. After hours of combat, Modena emerged victorious. The Bolognese were driven from the field, many captured, others fleeing in chaos. The Modenese celebrated not just for victory, but for restoring honor. They retrieved the stolen bucket and transported it back to Modena, where it was placed atop the Torre della Ghirlandina. The tower, a towering symbol of civic pride, now bore a tangible reminder of triumph. The story of the battle spread rapidly. Chroniclers in nearby cities documented the absurdity of the war. They recounted soldiers fighting over a bucket, merchants watching in disbelief, and citizens laughing at the lengths their neighbors would go for honor. Yet beneath the humor, the event carried lessons about medieval society. Pride, reputation, and symbolism could rival even the most strategic considerations in determining whether a war was waged. The War of the Bucket also highlighted the complexities of medieval Italian politics. Guelphs and Ghibellines were constantly in tension, shifting alliances like pieces on a chessboard. City-states like Modena and Bologna depended on reputation to secure trade, alliances, and military support. A stolen bucket, while trivial in itself, became a catalyst because it represented disrespect and a challenge to authority. A challenge that could not be ignored. Interestingly, the war demonstrated the duality of medieval warfare: brutal, deadly and strategic, yet sometimes absurdly symbolic. Armies could deploy hundreds of men, waste resources, and risk countless lives, all to defend or reclaim symbols of honor. It was a time when personal pride, civic loyalty, and public perception were as critical as territory or wealth. In the years that followed, Modena celebrated its victory annually, retelling the story of the battle and the recovered bucket. It became part of local culture and identity, a story passed down through generations. Bologna, meanwhile, faced the humiliation of defeat, forced to rebuild both its army and its civic image. The stolen bucket remained a potent symbol, reminding all Italian city-states that even the smallest insult could spark significant consequences. Historians often note the War of the Bucket as a cautionary tale about human ego and the absurdities of conflict. Entire armies, men risking death and property, clashed over what today would seem a laughable cause. And yet in the medieval mindset it made perfect sense. Honor was tangible. Symbols mattered. Defending civic pride could justify immense sacrifices, and losing it could have long-lasting repercussions on trade, politics, and alliances. Beyond the battlefield, the war also offers insights into medieval society. Citizens were deeply involved in their city's fortunes. Merchants, artisans, and farmers all contributed indirectly to the war effort, supplying food, weapons, and information. Families took personal pride in their city's reputation, and social cohesion often depended on collective identity and loyalty. A stolen bucket, therefore, threatened more than water. It challenged the very social fabric of Modena. The legacy of the War of the Bucket has endured precisely because it captures both human folly and courage. Modern visitors to Modena can see the bucket hanging from the Torre della Ghirlandina, an artifact that survived centuries of change, conquest, and modernization. It symbolizes the enduring power of civic pride, the human capacity for absurdity, and the way small incidents can escalate into events remembered for generations. Even today, the story is referenced in history classes, popular media, and viral videos. It serves as a humorous yet instructive example of medieval conflicts, illustrating that not all wars were fought for land or resources. Some were fought over symbolism, honor, and ego, and sometimes that symbolism took the form of an ordinary wooden bucket. The War of the Bucket also reminds us of the colorful nature of Italian city-states. Unlike the hierarchical monarchies of Northern Europe, these republics were fiercely independent, highly competitive, and culturally vibrant. Trade, art, and scholarship flourished alongside rivalry and occasional absurd warfare. Citizens were active participants in governance and defense, making every act, whether theft, retaliation, or celebration, loaded with meaning and consequence. From a military perspective, the battle demonstrates medieval tactics and logistics. Cavalry charges, infantry formations, archery volleys, and the use of terrain all played crucial roles. Yet despite the seriousness of these tactics, the war's origin and focal point, the bucket, makes it uniquely memorable. Armies could train for months, fight with precision, and die with honor, only for historians to remember the event for its ridiculous catalyst. In a sense, the War of the Bucket encapsulates the contradictions of history. human beings capable of profound strategy and innovation, yet also prone to absurdity and overreaction. It is a story of pride, rivalry, courage, and humor all rolled into one, reminding us that history is never purely serious. Ultimately, the War of the Bucket is more than just a funny anecdote. It's a lesson in human psychology, social dynamics, and the power of symbolism. A wooden bucket became a war, and that war became legend. Civilians, soldiers, and chroniclers alike participated in a narrative that still entertains and teaches centuries later. And so, the War of the Bucket remains a timeless story, a medieval conflict that combined strategy, symbolism, and humor. It shows us that even the smallest objects, like a simple wooden bucket, can hold the weight of pride, honor, and history itself. The battle may have been brief, the cause ridiculous, and the consequences mostly symbolic, but the memory endures, reminding us that history is often stranger than fiction.